I know that you are very focused on the falling enrollment. And obviously you guys are very focused on the projections that the demographer has made. One small thing that concerns me is that this room has managed to own the data in that document that was given to us at lunchtime today. We own it. We're asking you profound and serious questions about it, and you're kicking to touch saying they're really questions for the demographer. If this decision is going to get made on the basis of an assumption that we really are uncomfortable with as a community around projections of enrollment, the answer can't be the demographer told us. You have to own the data along with them. Okay?
I'm not here to answer that question. I'm just here to help you out with numbers.
My name is Joseph Chambry. I've got 3 kids. I'm in Meadow Pond, and I'm a numbers guy. And I've only had this report for an hour and a half on the train ride home. But I want to explain to everybody here that everyone's looking for statistics. He's ignoring statistics. He's using a specific method, the trend line, that is negative. The method is called cohort-survival ratio method.
There were a lot of questions about your use of the cohort survival method, and you made the comment that any demographer who stood there would use that method. Is there any alternative method? What other method would a demographer have used besides the cohort survival method?
In my dissertation, I used a regression-based technique. The technique, in terms of difficulty, is much more difficult for the cohort survival ratio.
If a summer student that we hire came to me and told me that regression is something they did in their dissertation and was too complex to use for the study, we would never have him step back in the door. Okay? Ever. If I went out there and said, oh, regression's too complex, I'd be fired on the spot.
There's multiple regression procedures. Other people use something called a dwelling unit multiplier technique. They actually look at it more of a housing-based analysis rather than a student-based analysis.
The CR method assumes what happened in the past will also happen in the future. It takes nothing into account.
But I do believe that the methodology is a sound methodology. It's much more sound than looking at something such as housing turnover analysis. That's a much more complex technique.
There were a total of 197 home sales in 2012, which is nearly 30% gain from 2011. He then goes on to say it's unclear whether the district is gaining students from that number. He's unaware that there's no beaches here, the weather's not mild, and you cannot walk to get your groceries.
You're the only district I've worked with in Westchester County.
And again, I don't want to take too much time because all these numbers are all wrong. All the data in this presentation focuses solely on 2007, 2011, and many times is shorter. The birth to kindergarten ratio is based on 5 years data prior and nothing else, even though it's a 20-year graph.
And you want to know what the pattern is for their enrollment?
Sure.
Straight down. This isn't real rocket science.
I'm a chemical engineer by training. I have a PhD. My thesis was actually in applied physics. I personally own about 78 US patents. The cohort survival method is fundamentally flawed for the analysis that he did.
But I've heard you say a couple of times, Janet, that we've lost 1,000 kids in a decade or so, and that is terrifying, but it's actually not true. There's only 1,000 child loss from peak to trough if you include the very conservative projections. We have actually lost 700 kids since the peak.
Historically, this town's been okay for 300 years. Like, why now? You know, it's survived. We don't need 0.68% of students and stuff. It's got to go up and down.
I only have 2 years of projections to show you how the last results came out, but that shows you it does work.
Having 2 years of accurate enrollment projections doesn't really tell us all that much about how accurate those projections are going to be in the future, because this is what we tend to see with enrollment reports, and this type of report in particular, that they tend to be accurate for the first couple of years, and then they tend to trend off. Something that's common to all demographers, and reading from Dr. Grip's dissertation, which you referenced earlier this evening, he himself says that beyond 1 to 2 years, the projections tend to be highly suspect, and that many school planners realise that they are poor long-term planning techniques. And that's not something that we have to go to academia to experience. We've experienced this in practical terms in our own schools already. If you look at the 1998 report that was done at the time of redistricting in the time of a rising enrollment, that trend was overstated too. For the first few years it was correct to a handful of kids, and then 5 years after that it was more than 300 kids off. And this was under a system that Dr. Grip himself says is more accurate than the methodology that he used. This community has been asked to act before on the basis of these kinds of projections. I'm sure people who've lived here for many years remember the 2002 $28 million bond that was raised to extend our school buildings that we were going to need in the future. These very same school buildings that you're now telling us are half empty. $12.4 million was spent on extending the middle school alone, and now that's the most underutilised building in our whole school district. That's not the only example of demography reports gone bad. You look at neighbouring communities and you see it too. And I'm sure that in each one of these cases, they were not sitting on their boards of education saying, well, we think the data's a bit shonky, but we're going to go with it anyway. They were all equally convinced, as you are convinced. They all had equally convincing presentations, and they were robust. And I say this with all respect for your service to the community. I think there is sometimes a tendency amongst all decision makers to make the assumption that they are not repeating the mistakes of decision makers that came before him, to believe that this time the circumstances and the decision is different. And unfortunately, that often turns out not to be the case. So I think you have to ask yourselves, why is this demographic report right when so many others in the past have been wrong?